Hi, my name is Rich Boconfuso, and today I'm going to give you a demo on the CLARiiON EMC CLARiiON AX product. What you see in front of you right here is my desktop and a topology or an architecture of how my demo configuration is set up. I'm working with the EMC CLARiiON AX 150 product, which is fiber channel attached to two hosts, which I'll describe in a moment. This particular array is a generation older than the latest array, the EMC AX4 product line. Functionality is very similar though, and you'll get a good flavor for some of the value that the AX product line can provide to your enterprise. What we see here is that the AX, my particular AX, has two storage processors on the back, as depicted on the back, and I have fiber channel connections out of each one of these storage processors. And dual power supplies, dual fans. Pretty much everything in this chassis is redundant. The chassis itself on the AX 150 supports up to 12 SATA drives, and up to 4 of these devices can be managed as one holistic unit. In the AX4 product, the latest product, this chassis supports SAS drives. You can mix and match SAS and SATA, and you can support up to 5 of these chassis managed as one unit. So what you'll see here is I have two fiber channel connections from my AX 150 to a fiber channel switch. In this case it happens to be a QLogic switch, but it could be a Brocade or Cisco as well. And then I have two servers, Windows 2003 Physical Server 1 and Windows 2003 Physical Server 2. Windows 2003 Physical Server 1 will be acting as our production system, and Windows 2003 Physical Server 2 will be acting as either our DR, dev, test, QA host, where we'll be mounting up a snapshot and showing you how that functionality works and the simplicity of it. What you see down here is basically kind of what currently exists, as well as what we're going to be creating and working with. So what currently exists on this array is Virtual Disk 1, and Virtual Disk 1 is mapped to Windows 2003 Physical Server 1, and I will show you that once we log into these hosts. And Virtual Disk 2 will be a new virtual disk which we'll create as part of the demo, and then we'll also create a snapshot of Virtual Disk 2 to kind of show you how that functionality works, as well as I'll walk you through the interface for the EMC AX and some of the software that resides on the physical hosts themselves, like PowerPath for path redundancy, facilitating failover of the SPs or storage processors on the AX 150, as well as something called the Navis Utility Kit or CLARiiON Utility Kit, which will facilitate taking snapshots, mounting snapshots, etc. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and launch two remote desktop sessions. The first one will be to our production host, which is 192.168.100.51, and that's Windows Win2K FizzServ 1. And I'm just going to connect to that guy. And now we are connected to that particular host. And you'll see that PowerPath window is actually open. I'm going to close it for right now, and we'll come back to that later. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure we can identify this host. So for some reason my background went away. So we will let's see, we'll recreate that background. Okay, so now you can see that we're on Windows 2003 Physical Server 1, and I'm going to open up another remote desktop session to Physical Server 2, which is actually 192.168.200.51, and we'll connect to that guy. Okay, so now you can see we're on Windows 2003 Physical Server 2. and everything looks good thus far. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open up Disk Manager and show you that we actually have a disk mounted on this guy, and you can see here I have AX150 Virtual Disk 1 mounted as drive R, and that's basically this disk here that I had shown before. So we'll come back to this host, and we're back on physical server 1, and from here the next thing I'm going to do is launch a Internet Explorer session, and we will go to AX150 SPA, which is how we attach to the AX150 to manage it, and we'll continue. And now I'm just logging in. The user interface to manage the AX150 is called Navis Express. It comes standard with this. And once I'm logged in, I'm basically presented with a web-based interface, which is where I'll perform all my management functionality for the AX150. So what we see here is basically the version of code that's running on this AX150. And then you'll notice in the left-hand margin there are a number of different options, and I'm going to walk you through each one of these before we actually do anything. So the first thing I'll do is go and look at the storage system. Here you can see I get the worldwide name of the storage subsystem itself, the serial number, the type of the model, system that it is, and then I can name the system anything I want, just for from a description perspective. If I had multiple, I may name them one DR, one production, just so I knew where I was. Then we'll go to disk pools, and disk pools here you can see it's pretty simple. I've gone ahead and created 2 disk pools because it takes a little time to actually do that. So I wanted to kind of speed up the demo by actually creating those before we got started. So the first thing you'll see here is I have 12 drives in this chassis, and I've configured 2 disk pools, as I mentioned. The first disk pool is across drive 0 through 3, which you see right here, 0, 1, 2, and 3, and that is a RAID 10, which means it's striped and mirrored, or mirrored and striped. And each drive, these are 750 gig ATA drives. Disk pool 1 again is a RAID 10. The total space available on disk pool 1 is just over 1.3 terabytes. And then I've also created disk pool 2, which is an 8 drive RAID 5 configuration, a 7+1. Total amount of capacity available on that disk pool is 3.2 terabytes. And you'll notice I don't have a hot spare here. In my lab I opted not to configure a hot spare, although configuring a hot spare could easily be done by creating a 6+1 and having this drive be determined as a hot spare. Now you'll see from here I can click on the disk pool, and it'll allow me to drill down, and it'll show me any virtual disks that I have created on this disk pool, which virtual disk 1 is residing on this 0+1 and mapped to Windows 2003 physical server 1. It will show me the status. If it was rebuilding or doing something, the status would change. It'll show me the number of drives in the pool, the capacity of those drives, and the state of each drive. From here, if I had available free drives, I could expand the disk pool, I can destroy it, I can defragment it, etc. So we'll just come back to the disk pool area. Now next I'll go to virtual disks, and here you'll see I have 1 virtual disk created. It's assigned to Win2K3 Phys1. And from here is where I would create a new virtual disk, and we'll come back and do that in a minute. From a hot spare perspective, it tells you if we don't have one defined, do I want to create one? I already know there's no drives available, so I won't click that. When I go and look at servers, it's going to show you all the physical servers that I have attached to this particular array. Each one of my servers has something called NaviAgent installed. At least my Windows servers do, and NaviAgent basically does the correlation of the server's HBA's worldwide name to the host name, so I don't have to worry about manually entering that. And I'll walk you through that process once we get to the connections area. But here you can see that all the connectivity status is active. These are the IP addresses of the particular hosts. This particular host that we're working with, Windows 2003 Physical Server 1, it has only one virtual disk mapped to it, Virtual Disk 1, and we'll re-examine that later when we map Virtual Disk 2. But from here I can click on that physical server and it'll give me some details. It tells me Virtual Disk 1, the device name on the host, tells me it's active, what type of machine it is, the operating system, basically some simple information. If I want to assign new virtual disks, I can go to Assign here and assign a new virtual disk. When you create the virtual disks, it also gives you an option to assign them. The next tab is Connections tab, and this will make it a little clearer as to why NaviAgent is important. If I did not have NaviAgent installed, the correlation of this HBA's worldwide name to the server name and IP address would be a manual process. So for instance, on my VMware servers up here, these are actually Linux hosts. I don't have NaviAgent installed, and I've actually gone ahead and manually registered these by clicking on the HBA, correlating it back to the worldwide name, and then saying modify and adding the server information to that particular HBA so that it shows up with the server name as opposed to mapping to the worldwide name. On the Windows servers, I didn't have to do that because I installed NaviAgent, and it was kind of the machines auto-registered themselves, and I can just go ahead and map volumes directly to the hosts as opposed to the HBAs. The next tab is Snapshotting, and we're going to investigate that functionality a little later on, but that allows us to take a snapshot of a LUN, a point-in-time copy, so we can go back and refer to that later. SAN copy, which we won't be able to demonstrate here, but SAN copy would allow us to use the array itself to either to copy data to another CLARiiON-based array, whether it's another AX or CX product line. We can actually create connections between the arrays and seamlessly migrate or copy data from one LUN to another on disparate or different arrays. Components will basically just show us all the components. So you can see I have 12 drives in this, number of fans, number of power supplies, storage processors, a UPS, and the overall health of the storage subsystem. Everything's functioning just fine here. Events, it basically will track all the events for me. So here you can see power supply A has failed. I probably lost power at one point to power supply A, and it just logs these events and keeps track of them in the array itself. I can also go in here, add users. I can create event notifications where I can email people. I can send SNMP traps, all the things you'd expect from an enterprise class device. Services, I can come in here and I can restart the management UI that we're looking at. I can reboot the entire system. I can shut it down. I can look at the details on the software, what's installed, each individual version of the software. I can also come over to software side and look at individual server software on this particular array. I can look at installation status, so you can see installations completed. If there's anything waiting to be done that requires a reboot or something like that, it'll be listed here as well. You can even I can even change the language if I had multiple languages installed. And that's pretty much it. So from there, that's kind of a broad overview of the of Navisphere Express and how you would the different components associated with Navisphere Express. At this point, before we move on and actually provision a new virtual disk, I'm going to minimize the management interface and kind of walk you through a couple things on the host side. The first thing you'll see here is I have Disk Manager open. I'm going to minimize that, and there's a couple tools that I've installed here that I just want to make you aware of. So if I go to Add or Remove Programs, previously I mentioned that the Navisphere agent is what allows the machine to auto-register itself. So you'll see here that I have Navisphere agent installed on this particular host. So this machine has auto-registered itself with the AX, so I can map LUNs or virtual disks directly to the host name as opposed to worrying about the HBA. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to make you aware of, is that I've installed a piece of software called Navisphere agent. The next thing I'll make you aware of is that I've installed a piece of software called PowerPath, and PowerPath is what provides path failover or path redundancy, both at the array and the host level. So here you'll notice that I have two connections from the array, and PowerPath Manager will facilitate the failover between these SPs. It'll facilitate the host being able to talk to both of these SPs without presenting multiple devices, and that's probably a little bit of a more complex discussion than just talking through it here, but in essence, every device is presented through both paths so the host can see it, and Navisphere Manager kind of masks those paths as a primary and a secondary so that you don't get multiple devices visible on the host side. On the host side, PowerPath will also manage failover between multiple HBAs. In our case, we only have one HBA, so it won't do that for us, but if we did have multiple HBAs, it would manage failover between those HBAs. So if you lost a particular connection from the host to the switch, and also in most cases you'd have multiple switches, you would still stay up and running and not even wouldn't affect production. So from here, very easily, I have two storage arrays connected to this host. So you'll notice the first storage array is a CLARiiON, and that's an iSCSI array. I have iSCSI LUNs mapped from that CLARiiON. And then our AX, which is this particular host here, there's two SPs. So here you can see controller 4 is basically, the C4 is the identifier for my HBA. And then we have T0 and T1, which is what identifies SPA is T0 and SPB is T1. So controller 4, target 0, target 1, disk 0, disk 0. Then we can see that disk 2 is visible through controller 4, target 0, D1, controller 4, target 1, D1. So it's visible through the HBA on the host and both targets on the AX. Fairly simple. This adapter, this is my adapter that's connected to our AX, and this is my adapter connected to my CLARiiON, which we're going to disregard. So what's important here is to realize that PowerPath takes care of all the masking, takes care of us only seeing one device for the AX in PowerPath as opposed to two devices, and potentially four devices, depending on how you're configured. But that's an important component of the configuration. The next piece that I have installed on this host is something called the Navisphere Server Utility. And what this does is this allows me to facilitate the creation of snapshots and also the mounting of those snapshots on our mount host or DR test QA host. So that's installed on both hosts. PowerPath is installed on both hosts, and also NaviAgent is installed on both hosts. So with that said, we're going to get started, and I'm actually going to go ahead and create a new virtual disk. So really simple. I go into Navisphere Express, either by IP to SPA or SPB, or if you have a DNS entry like I do, AX150_SPA, that will obviously resolve and take you directly to the AX150 or AX4 or whatever AX model you might have. So from here, we would click on Virtual Disks, and we will say Create New Virtual Disk. So here you'll see that you're presented with the two disk pools that are available for disks to be created on, or the two groups of drives or RAID groups. The largest possible virtual disk that we created, which is 100% of the total free space on that RAID group, the number of disks already provisioned, etc. We can rename this virtual disk. I'm just going to call it Virtual Disk 2. Virtual disk and LUN are synonymous. Sometimes you'll hear it referred to as LUN. Normally I refer to it as LUN, but since I'm trying to stay with the nomenclature used by the AX, we'll call it virtual disks. So I'm going to create a virtual disk 2, and I'm going to call it, I'm going to make it 1 gigabyte. And we're going to say we want one virtual disk. If we wanted to provision 20 1 gig virtual disks, we could go in here and say 20, and it would go ahead and provision 20 for us, but we're only going to do 1. The reason why I'm doing this at a capacity, actually, you know what, we'll do this at a capacity of 2 gigs, just so we can easily differentiate it from the first virtual disk, or virtual disk 1 that we created. And we're going to provision it and assign it to Windows 2003 Physical Server 1. Now you can do this beforehand, not assign it to any server, and then go into the Server tab and assign the virtual disk later, or come back to the virtual disk and assign it to a host later. But since we already have Windows 2003 Physical Host 1 registered and a 1 already mapped, we'll just go ahead and pick it here and actually do it all in one shot. So next I'm going to say apply. Again, I chose a 2 gig because it takes some time to prepare these virtual disks. The smaller they are, the faster it is. So for demo purposes, we'll go with 2 gig. So now I'm just giving it an eyeballing it and make sure it's okay, and I'll just say apply. And now it's going out there and provisioning it. And if we click on View All Virtual Disks That Have Been Created, you'll notice that the state of Virtual Disk 1 has changed to transitioning. That just means something is happening on the RAID group. And what's happening on that RAID group right now is that we're creating a secondary virtual disk, which is initializing and is currently at 7%. So this will take a few seconds. And I'll just refresh my screen to see if we can. So we're at 52% now. 74%. Still 74. Okay, so here now we're finished. You'll notice that the state has changed to normal, and we can see that Virtual Disk 2 is assigned to Windows 2003 Physical Server 1. It's 2 gigs in size. So our next step now, after we actually provision this, would be to open Disk Manager on the host that we just assigned that Virtual Disk to, and we'll go into Disk Manager, and very easily, without a reboot, we'll say rescan disks. And there we go. Our 2 gig virtual disk just popped up, and we'll come in here, and we'll come over here, and we'll say initialize, and we're going to initialize disk 5. Once that's ready to go, we'll say create a new partition. We'll say next, and we're going to create a primary partition. We're going to make it the whole 2 gig. And we're going to assign drive letter S, and we're going to call it AX Virtual Disk 2. Perform a quick format. We'll say next and finish. And there we have it. Okay, so it's formatting drive S. Once it's finished formatting, we will be able to come out here, go to my computer, open AX Virtual Disk 2, and say new text document test1.txt, and we'll open this up, test1, save it, take this, copy it, paste it a bunch of times. So there we go. Now we have a bunch of files, 11 files out there, 12 files, whatever it might be. So from here, the next step for us will be to, what I'd like to show you next is how to expand this virtual disk. So we have right now a 2 gig virtual disk, and we have the option to come into that virtual disk, Virtual Disk 2, and we have plenty of space on that LUN. So let's say we're out of space on Virtual Disk 2, and we need to grow that virtual disk to a 5 gig virtual disk. So I'm just going to say expand, and I'm going to expand this by 3 gigs, making it a total of 5 gigs. It's currently 2, and we will say apply, and we'll say yes. And we'll go back over here to view all existing virtual disks. And right now it's expanding, and this will take a few minutes, and then we'll go over to the host and see what happens there. Okay, while that's expanding, one thing to notice is if we open up the PowerPath console, we'll notice that disk 5 has been added to PowerPath pretty seamlessly. So that's been added to the configuration. Again, it's being masked from the PowerPath perspective, so we only see one path to that particular LUN, and we're not presented with 2 in Disk Manager, so it takes care of all that. It's going to take care of the failover for us. Pretty simple stuff. And we come back over here to Navisphere, and let's just refresh this, and we're 44% complete. So another 30 seconds or so, and we should be ready to go. Okay, so now you'll see that Virtual Disk 2 has returned to a state of normal. It's finished expanding. Its total size is 5 gig. What we'll do now is we'll flip back over to Disk Manager, and we'll go Action, and we'll do a rescan again. And now you'll notice that there's 3 gig of unallocated space now on that same physical disk. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to walk you through how to expand drive S or virtual disk 2 to consume that other 3 gig. Now, one note here is that this depends on what operating your system you're using and what file system as to how feasible it is to do this. In the Windows world, this is actually fairly simple. So what I will do is I will open a command prompt, and I will run diskpart, which is the command line tool to partition drives on Windows 2003. And we will do a list volume. Okay, so here we can see all the volumes that are out there. So what I want to do now is I want to list disk. Okay, and we are going to select disk 5, and we're going to list volume, select volume 3, and we're going to type extend rather. Okay, and you'll notice now in Disk Manager immediately that volume was extended. We'll exit here and exit here, and we have a volume that's been extended from 2 gig to 5 gigs. And just to show you, we'll come over here to drive S, and you'll notice now that this total volume size is 5 gigs. We'll come over here and we'll just we'll take some more files and we'll paste those, and you'll see reading and writing to those to this file system is not an issue. So no downtime to actually go ahead and expand that file system. Can be done pretty much that easily. So the next step, and everything we've done thus far, has been focused on the production host. We've created a volume, we've assigned it, we've grown that volume from both the AX150 perspective or AX perspective and the file system perspective on the Windows 2003 host. Now I'm going to actually show you a snapshotting functionality which will take into account a secondary host, whether that be a DR or mount host or QA test host. So I'm going to prepare the snapshot now, and I'm going to pick virtual disk 2. I'm going to assign it to a server, which is our second server, which is Win2K3 Physical Server 2, which is our mount host. I could actually leave this unassigned and then come back and assign it later, but since it's registered, we're going to do that. So we'll say apply. And right now it's creating the snapshot. So what we're ending up with now is we have virtual disk 1 that's been mapped, virtual disk 2 which has been mapped, which is the disk we mapped and expanded, and now we're creating a snapshot of virtual disk 2. So we'll come over here and we'll say view all snapshots, and it's still in the process of preparing, so this will take a few seconds to actually prepare this snapshot, and then we'll walk through the process of utilizing the snapshot from the host perspective. Okay, so the snapshot's 83% of the way there, so in a few seconds we should be done here. Let's refresh again, and I'll go back to snapshots, still sitting at 83%. Okay, so now we can see that the snapshot state is ready, which means it's ready to be utilized. So from here, we've kind of walked through all the feature sets within Navisphere Express. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to minimize Navi Express, come over to the host side, minimize Disk Manager here, minimize PowerPath here, and I'm going to open up the Navisphere Server utility, and we're going to perform a snapshot task. So we're going to start a snapshot, Our source disk is virtual disk 2, and it successfully completed a snapshot using that snapshot area that we just created on virtual disk 2. So now we're done on the production host, and we're going to flip over to the DR or mount host, and you'll see this guy on this host, PowerPath exists as well, and he has a similar, he has connectivity to the AX as well. He's not showing up because there's no drives mapped to him yet, so he won't show up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Navisphere, and we're going to say perform a snapshot task, and we're going to say allow access to the snapshot. So we want snapshot of virtual disk 2, and we're going to mount that on, let's say, drive F, and we'll just say next. And no devices were found that could activate this session. We'll say finish. I don't think we got it, so bear with me 1 second. I'm just going to perform a command here. There we go. So I just acquired the I essentially just acquired the AX. So that was a PowerPath command. Sometimes they need to do that. So since this is a demo, Murphy kind of stepped in, and second host wasn't exactly 100% there because the AX wasn't 100% set up in PowerPath. So we'll go through this process again and grab the snapshot. So we're going to allow access to the snapshot. Oh, no virtual disk discovered. We may actually have it already. Let's take a look. Nope. We may need to stop access. Let's remove access. Okay, so here we go. It's now performing the operation of mounting the snapshot. That looked a little confusing, but had I actually gone ahead and acquired the AX150 first, it would have not been that confusing. Okay, so that operation completed successfully, and a snapshot should be mounted on drive E. So we'll say finish, and we will come over here. And here you can see AX virtual disk 2 mounted on drive E. It looks like a 5 gig virtual disk. We'll open the same one up on our production host, which is drive S. And what we'll do here is we'll come out here and we will delete file 2 through 9. Oh, and there we go. We've deleted those files, and now you'll notice that those files still exist on the DR side, or the mount host side. We'll also come out here and we will create a copy of these guys, and you'll notice it doesn't affect the production side. We'll open up test 1 and match up what test 1 has in it versus what test 1 here has in it, and we'll modify test 1 to have test 2 in it here, test 3, and we'll save it. Then we'll come over here and we'll modify this guy to have test 10, test 11, and test 12, and we'll save this on the mount host. Now this could be used for a number of things. We could back up. This would be a persistent backup. We could shut SQL down for a second, take a snap, run a cold backup. So we can do a lot of things with snapshots. So from here, what we'll do next is we'll actually close this, and we will go over to Navis for utility, and we will remove access to a snapshot. So we're unmounting this snapshot from the host. Okay, so now that drive should be gone. It could be mounted on another host at that point. Lots of things could happen. And we're going to come back over to this host, and we're going to go and stop. We're going to stop a snapshot, which is our current running snapshot, on virtual disk 2, and say finish. And then we're going to come back in here and start another snapshot. On virtual disk 2. And that's been completed successfully. And we'll come over here and mount this snapshot, which will be a point-in-time copy of all the changes we just made on the production volume while the other snapshot was live. So we're going to allow access. To virtual disk 2. Now grabbing that snapshot. Okay, now that snapshot's been completed, and it's successfully assigned the drive of E. We'll say finish. We'll refresh this. And now you can see test 1 should have test 1, 2, and 3. It does. It's a persistent copy of what the snap looks like, or what the snap should look like on that particular host. So that pretty much concludes our demo. If we go and open the command prompt, and we do go to drive E, you'll see that we can also look at it from the console. It's 5 gig volume, and again, this snapshot's read-writable. It can be destroyed. It can be recreated. You can roll snapshots during the day. This can be scripted using a tool called ADM Snap if you don't want to use the GUI like I just demonstrated. I use the GUI from the host side because it tends to customers using snaps with AXs tend to like the GUI. Scripting's usually not necessary. So that's pretty much it. That concludes the AX series demo. My email address and everything will be presented at the end of this video, so if you'd like to get a hold of me, feel free to email me. Thank you.